Might seem crazy what I'm about to say. The sun shines, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air like I don't care, baby, by the way. Snap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Snap along if you feel like a happiness is the truth. Snap along if you know what a happiness is to you. Snap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Snap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Snap along if you feel like a happiness is the truth. Snap along if you know what a happiness is to you. Hey, snap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
Well, I must say you have the hippest piano player in any Unitarian church. If I didn't have arthritis in both thumbs, I would have been snapping a lot louder. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. And thank you for having me back here at Lower Bucks. Pop psychologist Wayne Dyer once said that how you feel is more important than what you know. I would agree with that. And also, I would say that in addition to that, how you feel is more important than how much money you have, how smart your kids are, how big your house is, or anything that we consider important in our lives. Because if you have any or all of those, and you feel lousy, what's the point? Or as my father-in-law, who was from Brooklyn, used to say, what's the pernt? So, how do you feel? Happy? Sad? Or maybe you're so beleaguered by all that life is throwing at you these days that you don't have time to think about how you feel. When he was still a practicing psychologist before he became famous, Wayne Dyer lived on Long Island and lived next to a woman who had 10 children. He always marveled how well she handled those kids, who seemed to be very well adjusted, very well behaved, and a very kind of normal household despite the fact they had 10 kids. And one day he asked her, how is it you handle these kids so well when having 10 children would drive most people crazy? She stopped and thought for a second and said, you know, I was thinking about having a nervous breakdown, but I just don't have the time. Maybe when the kids grow up and go away to college or get married, I'll have time to have a nervous breakdown. But right now, I just don't have the time. Well, there's a lot of truth in what she says, but you know, you don't have to have 10 kids or be on the verge of a nervous breakdown to have the pressures of everyday life affect how you feel. And sometimes when we come home from a hard day at the office, or from wherever, and we're feeling kind of lousy, we want to feel better. And so, what do? Well, a glass of wine, a beer or two, maybe a martini if it's an especially bad day. And that's not so bad once in a while, if it's once in a while. But if it happens over and over again, then you have to really sort of examine what's making me feel so bad that I have to do this so often. Sometimes I refer to these things that we take as self-medications. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a glass of wine or a martini. It could be food, sex, rock and roll, the internet for some people, even sleep. Psychologist Ken Dykewald talks about a friend of his who worked in a job that he hated. But he stayed in this job year after year because it was a family business and he felt a certain sense of obligation. But one day he had had enough and he quit. And the next time that Dykewald saw his friend, he looked great. The man said he felt great. And best of all, the man said, I don't throw up every morning before I go to work. Not surprisingly, Ken Dykewald said, did you think that was a little strange that you were throwing up every morning before you went to work? And the man said, no, I thought everybody who hated their jobs did that. You can react this way to a job you hate, or you can pretend that it doesn't exist, a problem doesn't exist. Dykewald talks about another guy driving down the highway, and he sees a flashing red light on his dashboard, which almost always means trouble. I mean, flashing red lights don't say, you're getting great gas mileage. So he pulls over to the side of the road, goes into his trunk, pulls out a roll of duct tape, tears a piece off, and puts it over the flashing red light. Problem? What problem? I don't know if you know this or not, but in the last 5 or 6 years, as we have been going through the worst economy since the Great Depression, duct tape sales have gone through the roof. In my own particular situation, I got a letter from my editor at Wine Spectator magazine, and actually it wasn't even a letter, it was an attachment. It wasn't a phone call or a lunch, but an attachment. And the attachment said, because of the economy and because revenue is down, we have to cut back on expenses. And what happens with magazines, as you may or may not know, is that if you have less revenue, then the editorial part of the magazine gets smaller too. And because you can't afford to pay people as much. And so they told me the column that I had for like 12 years was going to be eliminated, and that I would have fewer and fewer assignments. Now, even though I was a contributing editor and a columnist, I wasn't on staff, so they didn't have to fire me. I already wasn't getting health care and vacation and that stuff. Not surprisingly, that was a real emotional blow. It was also a big financial blow, cut my income in half. Fortunately, I had a good supply of duct tape on hand, and I was able to channel my feelings in another direction, mostly toward church, actually. I was already president of the board of trustees, and just about the time that I got my email attachment, the minister went on sabbatical. So we had to cover the bases until he returned 6 months later. And right about the time that he returned, I went off the board of trustees. So the combination of him returning and coming off the board of trustees meant that all those responsibilities that kept the duct tape in place were gone. And that duct tape sort of came off like a Band-Aid over a wound on a hairy leg, you know. So, what did I do? Well, I did what people do when they come home and have a hard day, right? I had a glass of wine or two, although I always had a glass of wine or two with dinner because of the nature of my profession. But this time I had a third glass of wine, sometimes a fourth glass of wine. And when you tend to drink a little bit more than you should, you tend to be a little bit more indiscriminate about what you eat. So I started to gain weight. And that didn't make me feel good either. At some point, several months later, I started to notice that the increase in alcohol consumption was affecting my medication. Actually, I knew in the back of my mind all along that it was affecting my medication, but, I had been diagnosed with dysthymia, which is a chronic depression that doesn't prevent you from getting up out of bed in the morning, usually, but it does make your life very difficult. You feel irritable and often angry and less tolerant of people, irritable, that kind of stuff. And I had a meeting with the minister shortly thereafter, shortly after he came back from his sabbatical, and he said that he had noticed that I had been crankier than usual. Cranky is a very good word for people who suffer from dysthymia. And he suggested that we have a little session to talk about my situation. And we did. Now, in addition to being a minister, Kent Mathias, our minister, is also well suited for this kind of a conversation because in addition to being treated for depression on occasion, he's also a recovering alcoholic with about 20 years of sobriety, so he knows this stuff pretty well. And he told me about how much better he felt when he wasn't drinking than when he was drinking. But he was a little envious of people who could have a glass of wine or two and not let it go further than that, like his wife. His wife said, hey, you're alcoholic, that's not your problem, not my problem. So she'd have a glass of wine or two with dinner. And he said, after all these years, there's probably an 80% chance that nothing would happen if I had a glass of wine or two. But there's also a 20% chance that something might happen. And I don't want to take that chance. Because, again, as he said, how much better he felt when he wasn't drinking than when he was drinking. And then he said something that echoed what Wayne Dyer said earlier. He said, ultimately, what really counts is how you feel. So, how do you feel? Some people may think that asking yourself how you feel is being self-centered. But the reality is, how you feel affects everybody in your life. Friends, family, coworkers, people at your church. And if you don't believe me, ask them. They will tell you. So, can you think of a time when you were feeling really good? Do you ever notice that when you're feeling really good, good things seem to happen? The things that seem to annoy you not only don't annoy you, they don't even happen. Let's say your boss comes up to you one morning and says, congratulations, Charlie, you got that promotion that you were looking for and you got the raise. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? So you get in your car and you say, I'm going to go to the mall and buy myself that whatchamacallit that I always wanted but thought I couldn't afford. And it's a beautiful fall day. It's bright and sunny and the colors are everywhere. You're driving down the road and the radio's playing every single one of your favorite oldies. Nobody's cutting you off on the road. No fingers. Get to the mall, go in there, and you go to the clerk who's happy to see you, charming, knows what they're talking about. And of course, when you feel lousy, things come at you in 3s and 4s, right? That's sort of the way things work. Martin Seligman, who wrote a book called Authentic Happiness, talks about how when we're not happy, we are less focused, we like others. When we are happy, we are less focused, we like others more, and we want to share our good fortune. When we are down, we become distrustful, we turn inward, and focus defensively on our own needs. So, what do when you're feeling lousy and want to feel better without that third martini or throwing up like the guy that Ken Dykewald talked about? Well, there isn't any magic formula, but some of the solutions are surprisingly easy. When a patient came to Wayne Dyer once and said, "Dr. Dyer, I'm depressed. What should I do?" And Dyer's answer was, anything. And what he meant by that was, when you're engaged in an activity, it's hard to feel depressed or more lousy because you're too busy engaging in that activity. Maybe not as active as the woman who has 10 kids, but busy and active. So one of the things that I do, I go outside. One of the things that's what you should do is just get up from wherever you are and get out of there. And getting out of there could mean just going for a walk, mowing the lawn, cleaning the house, whatever. And then when you do something like that, don't just do it and move on to something else. Do it and then stand back and look at it and say, good job. I mean, let it sink in that you're accomplishing a task, because even though it may seem trivial, the accomplishment of a task is helpful in getting you back on the road to feeling good. Even better, of course, is helping others, being of service to other people, something that we UUs know a lot about. That's sort of part of our DNA. And the Dalai Lama says in the book that I just read from that the surest way for happiness is to be of service to other human beings. It doesn't have to be a big thing. I mean, it could be one of those random acts of kindness. A few months ago, I was taking my car into the dealership for some service. And because they were going to take longer than I thought, they gave me a loaner to drive back home so I could come back the next day. As I was arriving home, I noticed that the back support that I had in my car, I forgot to take out. And I thought, well, I've got an extra one in the garage. I'll put it in there and when I go back. And so I got back to the dealership the next day and took that back support out. And I went to the desk, and the woman saw this back support, and she said, "Oh, I really miss my back support." And I said, "Here, take this one. I have an extra." And she immediately put it behind her back and sank into it, and the look on her face was like somebody had just given her an hour massage. Well, the glow from that random act of kindness lasted about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. About as long as eating a pint of your favorite flavor of Ben & Jerry's. But this random act of kindness did not have any calories and didn't cost anything. Finally, one of the things to think about to feel better when you're not feeling so good is gratitude. I know that's kind of difficult to be grateful when you're feeling lousy, but let's face it, all of us are better off than a lot of people in this world. As a matter of fact, without knowing your individual circumstances, I would say everyone in this room probably lives better than 95% of the people who have ever lived in the history of the world. Now, you may think that's, an exaggeration, but do you think Julius Caesar had hot and cold running water? Do you think Cleopatra had central air conditioning? Do you think Alexander the Great had cable? That may or may not be a benefit for some people. One of my favorite movies is Lion in Winter. Anybody ever see that movie? Great movie. Great play, too. I saw it as a play as well. Anyway, the movie takes place in December of 1183. And King Henry II, played by Peter O'Toole, has gathered his dysfunctional family together for Christmas. And in one scene, King Henry is getting out of bed on a very cold December morning. There isn't any double-pane window, just a curtain to cover up the opening out to the very cold air. And the fire that was roaring when he went to bed is out. And the central heating system hasn't gone on yet because it doesn't exist. So, not surprisingly, Henry gets out of bed, shivering, teeth chattering, throws the blanket over his shoulder, and walks across the room to wash up and get ready for his day. And as he does that, he walks across a very cold stone floor. No thick pile carpeting, very cold stone floor. And he doesn't go into a bathroom with hot and cold running water or nice lights, a toilet, maybe a heat lamp or a space heater to warm him up. He goes over to a table with a bowl. And in that bowl is water. But because it's so cold in his room, there's a thin layer of ice on that water that he has to break through to throw it on his already frigid face. The guy's a king. Think about that the next day you wake up on a very cold December morning. And for the rest of your day, and for many days to come, may you all live better than kings and queens. May it be so. Thank you, and amen.